Hi, this is Linda Abraham. I'm the president and founder of Accepted. I'm also the moderator for today's webinar. And I want to welcome all of you to the 5-Step Guide to Successful Medical School Personal Statements. I'm thrilled to introduce Jessica Pishko, who will present the 5-Step Guide to Successful Medical School Personal Statements today. In 2014, Jessica started helping Accepted's clients get accepted to medical school. Prior to that, she spent 2 years guiding students through the medical school application process at Columbia's post-bac program. And she also taught writing at all levels. She has an MFA from Columbia and a JD from Harvard Law. Without further ado, Jessica Pishko and the 5-Step Guide to Successful Medical School Personal Statements.
Thank you, Linda. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar today. As Linda mentioned, this is a participatory webinar, so from time to time we will ask questions, and again, at the end I will take questions so you can take notes as we go and see if there's something you would like to ask at the end. Okay, so again, this is the 5-Step Guide to Successful Medical School Personal Statements. So the first question, just to kind of get an idea of who you guys are and where you are in the process, in the question box, if I could get you to type in,
are you doing the geographic, where are you at?
I was going to do the geographic one.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
My apologies.
We're going to have a question box and then a few polls. So in the question box, if you could type in where you're located. So if you're abroad, what state you're in, just so I can get an idea of who's here and where you guys are coming from.
Okay. So, anybody? All right, here we go. Delaware, Indianapolis, Indiana, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, Massachusetts, Florida, North Carolina, South Florida, Texas, Arizona, Austin, Texas, woo, really all over the country, Connecticut, Colorado, Mississippi, Ontario, Canada, California, go California, Georgia, Chicago, Illinois, San Diego, California, Michigan, Wyoming, West Virginia, I think, New Jersey, California, Florida, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Seattle, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Chicago, Illinois, really all over the country. That's
all
great.
over the country. And I see also a few people in Canada. So
yes.
Great. So those of you who are in Canada, I assume also that you are applying to medical schools in the U.S. So just so you guys know. So we're going to talk about applying to U.S. schools. But many Canadian students do apply to American medical schools. Okay, the next couple questions will be polls. So if you go to the poll box, the first question is, where are you in the application process?
And you should see that on your
Yeah,
screen.
You should see. So I have applying 2017, applying in 2018 or later, or not sure. So not sure would be you're just exploring the opportunity and you haven't decided when to apply.
Okay, and we have 69% having voted, 74% having voted. Can we get it over 80%? All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm closing the poll. We have a fantastic group here today. 87% having voted, and here are the results. 62% are planning to apply in 2017, 28% are applying in 2018 or later, planning ahead, and 11% are not sure.
Okay, great. So it looks like most of you guys are planning to apply this cycle. Smart thinking to start now. May is the time I would definitely at least start thinking about it. Okay, the next question in the poll is if people are applying to MD or DO programs. Okay. We will cover both to some degree in this webinar, but I just want to see what people are doing.
Here we go. All right, we are over 70%. We get it over 80%. MD, DO, or both. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. With 80% having voted. I guess this wasn't quite as popular as the other one. I'll share the results. 48% MD, 7% DO, 45% both.
Okay, great. It's fantastic to know. Okay, and then the last question is, have you started writing your personal statement yet? So yes, I've begun writing, I've made some notes, or no, not at all. No judgment on your answers.
Yeah, you won't get graded on your answers. No grades here, okay? It's pretty risk-free. Okay, we have over 70%. Can we get it over 80? 5, 4, 3, come on, vote. 2, 1. With 80% having voted, the results are 40%, 7% have begun writing. Good for you. 27% have made some notes and 27% not at all.
Okay, well that would match if you haven't decided whether to apply or if you're applying for 2018, I think.
Yeah,
I would
really.
not expect you, I would not expect you to have started
That's
writing.
right. That's right, for sure.
Okay. Well, so for everyone on the spectrum, I hope that this is useful. So, well, writing a med school personal statement can seem daunting. Today, I'm going to break it down into 5 easy steps. So before I start with the steps, I just want to give a broad overview on the purpose of the personal statement, which I think it's important to place in the context of your AMCAS application or your DO application in general. So as you guys probably know by now, there's many parts of the AMCAS application. There's your MCAT scores, your grades, the letters of recommendation, work and activities, and the personal statement. Right, so the personal statement is sort of one piece of the pie. Although granted, the personal statement, unlike some other aspects of your application, you have a bit more control over, right? And then if we go, I think, to the next slide, I just wanted to give some basics on the personal statement. So most people don't like writing personal statements. If that is you, you are not alone. Most people think, I don't like writing about myself, or I have too much to say. And the personal statement, one of the reasons why it's so difficult is because it's intentionally left open-ended. Right? The question is left broad on purpose because the admissions committee wants to see what you have to say given a limited amount of space. The personal statement is the place to write about information that the admissions committee won't see anywhere else on your application. So you should work to distinguish yourself. There's our distinguish yourself slide. And then a key point that I cannot emphasize enough, and I think many people won't bother to say this, but no baloney. Don't make things up. Don't exaggerate. It's important that you be yourself in the personal statement, even though you want to distinguish yourself, only in a good way. Okay, so now just the nuts and bolts of the personal statement. First important thing is character count. You guys might know this already. The AMCAS is 5,300 characters. The ACOMAS is 4,500 characters. So for those of you applying to both, it's important that you know that it's a different length for each personal statement. And the ACOMAS personal statement does need to be a little bit different from the AMCAS statement in a few respects. So I do suggest if you're applying to both, you leave time for that revision, right? It's a mistake to think that you can just really quickly whittle your AMCAS statement down really fast. And as you also notice, the word count is limited, so you need to make your words count. And although the MCAS will have you type the personal statement into a form, I think the ACOMAS is the same way, you should write the personal statement in a separate document like Word or Google Docs and revise it in that document and then cut and paste it at the end. And you should really do that with all the questions for the application. And before we move on, I just wanted to give this quote from someone on the admissions committee at Washington University School of Medicine. He said, "We also want applicants to personalize the statement, to tell us something about themselves that they think is worthy of sharing with us, something that makes them unique, different, and the type of medical student and future physician that we're all looking for." So that's, I think, something to keep in mind as you work on your application and your personal statement. So in summary, I will encourage you guys to see the personal statement as an opportunity. It's the chance for you to show the admissions committee who you are and what kind of physician you will be. All right, so on to the 5 steps. I guess that's what kind of physician you will be with a blurry face. All right, so I break down writing the personal statement into 5 steps. And the 5 steps are evaluate, brainstorm, write, revise, and get advice. And again, always remember the overall goal, to give the admissions committee an idea of who you are and what kind of physician you will be. And a key point I will also emphasize is time. I'll come back to this later. The application season, as you guys know, is very busy. If you're finishing school, you probably have exams. If you're doing your application, you might be taking the MCAT. You have other application things. You probably work or volunteer. So you have other things going on in your life, and it's important that you're realistic. I suggest that you reserve at least 1 month to do these 5 steps. In other words, start your personal statement at least a month before you want to be done with it. And the other thing I suggest is to set aside some time every week to work on your personal statement. A mistake some people do is they say, oh, well, I'll write it this weekend or something like that. And then if it goes afoul that weekend or it's not working the way you would like, they get really discouraged. So rather than that, set aside, I would say, smaller chunks of time every week. So every few days, spend time on the personal statement. It makes it a much more manageable task. Okay, next let's go through each step. So the first step is to honestly evaluate your strengths and weaknesses. We'll actually have some participatory things in this. And here's a few things to consider. You need to consider your grades and your MCAT, your volunteer work with a focus on long-term commitments, your research experience, your shadowing, personal hardships, and other extenuating circumstances. And also you should consider all your other strengths. So here we're going to open it up for you guys to do a little bit of brainstorming right now. I'll ask you guys, you could type in the box, what do you feel like are your core strengths? If that's a really hard question for you to answer, I also suggest that you think about what would people who know you say about you. So if you ask someone close to you, like a friend or a family member, to describe you, what would they say? So go ahead and enter a few things in the box.
This would be in the question box.
In the question box, yes.
Heather writes that she's a great listener. Kevin lists his strength as community service in my activities. Morgan says a hard worker. Devlin says generous and helpful. Compassionate, diligent, resilient. If I mispronounce somebody's name, please accept my apologies. Vishali says quick learner. Tyler, personable and easy to talk to. Shanice, determined and helpful. Anybody else want to list a strength? Okay.
You guys sound super.
Yeah. Dedication to community service, worked in community arts for 6 years, empathetic. This is Victoria.
Yeah, these are great. I mean, and as I'm sure you guys also noticed, we'll kind of go through this, talk about this as we go on, that people are kind of going back to some similar qualities. And so actually the one that's kind of interesting me is more talk about community service, which actually I think is a great one and was less of, I feel like was less of something that people said in years past, but I think it's great. So you'll notice a lot of them are similar. So one of the things we'll talk about is how to distinguish yourself in that way. Next, remember that the personal statement is read in the context of your whole application. So as I've said a few times, you can emphasize personal qualities that aren't otherwise evident or describe significant obstacles not reflected in the application. This is something that many people struggle with, right? The sort of explaining obstacles, explaining difficulties, and oftentimes this boils down to something like explaining grades and scores that you might be concerned about. This is always kind of a technical difficulty that a lot of people have to manage. My suggestion when it comes to grades and scores is never make excuses about your grades. If you have significant reason to explain, for example, a number of withdrawals, a semester that you had to take off, or a semester of poor grades, you should provide context in the personal statement, but you don't want the personal statement to become a huge apology for, maybe a mistake you made one semester. Okay, so that brings us to step 2. You might have slide. Oh, there's the grades, yeah.
There we go.
Okay, step 2, no, it's all right. Step 2, brainstorm on why you want to go to medical school and be specific. So this is the question you need to answer, right? Why medical school? Right? The question. And here's another quote I have from an admissions dean. And I'm going to read the whole thing, but here I just put a little bit. We look for some originality because 9 out of 10 essays leave you with a big yawn. I like science, I like to help people, and that's why I want to be a doctor. The common, uninteresting, and unoriginal statement is one that recounts the applicant's academic pursuits and basically repeats what is elsewhere in the application. You look for something different, right? So kind of going back to that, the fact that many people have the same motivations for going to medical school. And I certainly hope that you do want to help people if you want to go to medical school. But the question becomes, how can you be more specific, right? So how do you do that? How can you stand out? So the first thing I suggest is to take some time. Again, you'll hear me say this over and over. It just takes time. So in the question box, let's do a little bit of brainstorming now. Why are you interested in medical school?
Again, in the question,
this can include the reasons you are interested in medicine generally, the ways you will contribute to your med school class, and the ways you hope to contribute to the medical field.
Or qualities and experiences that you've had that prepared you for medicine is another way to.
Yeah, that would be another way to frame it.
Way to go.
We'll collect a few answers and then talk about them, which I think will be helpful for everyone. So by donating your own responses, you will benefit
You'll get
others.
some feedback on it. So
yeah, you'll also get feedback.
Why do you want to be a doctor? In a chat window. I realize you're going to write an essay on this, so it's a little bit unfair.
Right. We're just thinking little snippets, like a brainstorm. So I do not expect you to write your essay right now.
Right. Okay. So Victoria says, I know the value of a good diagnosis versus a bad one. I was an undiagnosed celiac for 4 years. Or Adam writes, I had a number of sports injuries, and in the process I fell in love with the rehabilitation process. I love how it can build you up physically, mentally, and spiritually. Morgan writes, I'm fascinated by the way the body works and functions, and I have a knack for explaining that to others. It's a good one. Michelle writes, to help babies. Med school to understand whole body, osteopathic to understand how to treat mind, body, spirit. I guess med school she means allopathic, MD as opposed to DO. Or Umeya writes, I want to be able to use advanced technologies in order to heal people. All right. Do you want to give some feedback?
Yeah, you guys have good responses. So 2 of the responses I heard fall into the category that I call, like, I was a patient and now I want to be a doctor sort of narrative, right? And so these and I sort of group stories under this category that are like, either you had an illness or a family member had an illness and that inspired you to be a physician. So the first thing to realize, if that's you, that is actually, it's a pretty common narrative. And so doesn't mean you shouldn't write it. But as you write it, one thing to think about is, why did that inspire you to be a doctor rather than something else? So say, for example, I myself have had surgery, but I'm not a doctor, right? So being treated for medical problems is not very unique, but the reason why it made you want to be a doctor is unique.
Excellent.
So just kind of bear in mind that that's something, like, you need to be specific. Why medicine and why not social work, nursing? If medical treatment could inspire you to go into global health, right? So you need to sort of be specific in that way. I saw a few answers in science, which are also really good. Again, you'll want to think about explaining exactly what that means to you. Someone brought up explaining concepts to others, which is a really great thing to write your personal statement around. This is back in Columbia post-bac, someone wrote a really great personal statement about teaching. He was he had a lot of research experience, right? So again, putting it in context of the MCAS, this was an individual with tons of research experience on his resume, but he took a job teaching like a teenage girl biology, and that was a really difficult challenge for him. And so in the personal statement, he talks about the challenge of trying to teach someone biology who wasn't interested in science at all. That was a really nice way to kind of round out the application, because on the resume side, this applicant looked like a really serious, researcher. So it was a nice way to sort of develop his personal qualities. Okay, and then helping people, of course, again, one of the harder ones, I think, to illustrate, but you'll want to be specific. Again, all you can do is just be specific about helping them, what that means to you. Because, of course, as you guys all know, medicine helps people, but it also doesn't always help people, right? If you cannot heal someone, why would you want to be a doctor anyway? With the knowledge that it's not always going to work out. Okay, and then, so this all brings back to the writing maxim of show, don't tell. So, and the thing I want you guys to bear in mind as well is that med schools are looking for people with a desire and the capacity to get through the program and do well. Like, they want people who are going to finish, basically, and be good doctors. And the last thing I think that people should remember as they write their personal statement, and indeed go through the whole process, is that the med school doesn't need you. You need them, right? Remember, 9 out of 10 applicants are qualified. So rather than seeing that as sort of terrifying, I would say turn it around and say, okay, so that means you want to give them a reason to want you, which I think also kind of makes it more of a humble process, right? You need to show that they should want you rather than showing like why they should take you, right? They would be so lucky to have you as a student. Okay, and this also sort of all goes back to how you explain things tells a lot about what kind of person you are. So I was talking to an admissions dean from Johns Hopkins who said he interviewed 2 applicants who both pushed gurneys at the hospital as sort of a volunteer job. Some of you guys might have done something like that. And he asked each applicant in their interview about that job, and one of the applicants said the job was okay, and then didn't say anything else. And then another applicant gave a sort of like detailed response of all the things that she had learned from the job, and what was hard about it, what she learned about people and hospitals. And so he said at the end, well, sort of, what person do you think I'm going to accept to med school? Like, who's the person you want to be your doctor? So at the other end of the line, there's always someone there reading and listening to you. So the lesson there is be specific and take advantage of every opportunity to show enthusiasm. All right, step 3, start writing. The best part. So you'll notice that this is the middle step, not first, not last. A lot of people either don't leave enough time to kind of brainstorm, or they don't leave enough time to revise, right? So I think I have a timeline in the next slide to kind of think about the timeline, right? Like time to brainstorm and free write, time to consider your message, time to do a rough draft, time to ask for feedback, time to do revision. And I always suggest that people write a draft, put it away, go back to it, right? Don't do it all in one night. It is so hard. And I can also assure you that no professional writer writes anything in one day. I mean, you can't. You really, you just can't. You put it away, you come back, because it's too hard, and you need the time and perspective to think about it. Writing is as much thinking as it is getting words on a page. In the initial part of the writing process, if you are a person who's really daunted by a blank page, I suggest that you just start writing. Don't worry if it's the beginning, the middle, the end, whatever. If you have to type something, just start typing something, because it's easier to take blocks of text and then shape it into an essay, right? You could start with writing something that you know is terrible. This is why I wanted to go to medical school, and just write something, because for some people that blank page is really daunting. And then I have a quote by a writer, since we're in the writing section, and she says, the first draft is the child's draft, where you let it all pour out and then let it romp all over the place, knowing that no one is going to see it and that you can shape it later, right? So remember, no one has to see any of your rough drafts, any of your brainstorming. Don't worry about how it looks. Now, as you kind of dig further into the writing process and start to write more and more, try to choose the best details that show what you were like and what you will be like as a physician. So things you want to emphasize: volunteer work, service, working with people, but it doesn't just have to be medical. Scientific curiosity, which does not just have to be in a lab. And then you want to consider whether you need to balance out an application. This kind of goes back to one of my anecdotes earlier, right? You don't want to repeat, you don't want everything to tell the same story. You don't want the personal statement, the work and activities, and the letters of recommendation to kind of regurgitate something verbatim. You want to be able to show kind of different sides of yourself so you seem really interesting. So that's something to think about as well. And then the thing I urge everyone to avoid, the sort of dreaded resume in prose, which kind of is usually a timeline of your accomplishments. The admissions committee doesn't want to read a list of your accomplishments. So when you write the personal statement, you want to pick the ones that are the most meaningful for you. Also bear in mind, not that you want to think about this now, but you will have secondaries to write as well. So all those other ideas that you don't use in the personal statement, they will get used later. This is not sort of your one chance to, you don't want to think of it as a chance to drop everything in, right? You could save some stuff for later. And finally, remember, show, don't tell. You always want to give specific stories and examples. Oh, and sometimes I get this question, this made me think of this, giving specific stories. Often people have specific stories about patients, and there's a concern about HIPAA, which you guys being prospective doctors, you should be concerned about HIPAA. I tell people just give it's fine to just give a pseudonym or a sort of, a first name or Mr. A or something. You can give some sort of pseudonym to people in the personal statement. I think that's fine and accepted practice that is understood by everyone. To be, you're giving them a pseudonym so you don't violate HIPAA. If you're transitioning careers or have a different route to medical school, you want to show your change in a positive light. So coming from a different career or a different background, admissions officers like that. They want to see people with different experiences, but you want to put your transitions in a positive light. So you don't want to say, oh, I tried this job and I hated it, right? That's not so positive. You want to say, I'm going to med school because I love this. On the other hand, if for some reason you are a person that something happened, like I suggest if you were laid off through no fault of your own because your company went under, there's no harm in admitting the truth. Similarly, if you have a challenge to write about or a difficulty you overcame, emphasize how you overcame the challenge, not the struggle itself. So you want to try to keep your personal statement positive. It doesn't mean, by positive, I don't mean like it has to be happy or everything in it needs to be happy, but rather you want to kind of emphasize all the things you've done to move forward rather than sort of like a heaping of sorrows of things that have held you back. So it's okay to admit weakness or a mistake, but not, you just don't want it to read like a soap opera, tragedy or something. A few other tips I have. Don't embellish. So don't write about research if you didn't understand it, because someone might ask you in an interview about it. Never, ever, ever make stuff up. Don't get cute. So don't write a poem, song lyrics, a Wikipedia entry. Sometimes people say, well, I wanted people to notice my personal statement. You do, but you want them to notice it in a good way, not in a bad way, right? You don't want to stand out as like the person who did this thing and, that was bad. Finally, remember that many people have the same basic resume and experiences. So write the things that will get you noticed. Again, in a good way, not a bad way. Okay, step 4 is revise, revise, revise. And interestingly, revision is my favorite step because it's really kind of I think revision is actually kind of the fun part because you have something to work with and now you get to make it better. So again, leave time for revision longer than you think. And here's some things that you want to make sure. So the other thing about revising is sometimes people make this mistake of thinking, oh, I'll read it one time and I'll revise everything at one time. This, I think, comes from like college work where you like do it the day before it's due or something, right? You don't want to do that with your personal statement. I suggest thinking of revising as like you're going to revise in cycles. And actually, this is how writers revise. You revise in cycles. So the first kind of cycle of revision is, does your essay make sense? This is you want it to make sense. If it doesn't make sense, then you immediately have to revise it so it does. So that's a, kind of ground base. The next one is, do you have specific and vivid examples? Is it memorable? Get rid of cliches, get rid of I want to save the world or the innocence of children, all of those sort of things. That's sort of the next round of revision. Then the final round of revision is the essay grammatical and error-free? Oh, I think that was my things. Maybe that's I don't remember how I did this. Next, is it? I guess that's like using the senses. All right. Well, anyway, the final one is make sure it's grammatical and error-free. Next, we'll break down the revision steps. So, make sense. I feel like there's something weird going on the slides here. In terms of making sure your essay makes sense, give your journey to medical school in a way that emphasizes your commitment to going without putting down other professions, right? So remember that people other than doctors might read it, lawyers, ethics professors, people whose moms are teachers. I mean, so you don't want to put down other professions. The next thing is like, is the story coherent? You want to make sure that you tell your story in a way that people can understand it, right? Remember, these people don't know you, and they read your personal statement rather fast. So you don't want them to have to like sort of fill in the blanks or, guess what happened next. You want it pretty clear on the page. And to that end, I also suggest that people think about shorter sentences and shorter paragraphs because kind of shorter things are a bit easier to read and digest. One test is if you can read the sentence in one breath. Sometimes people get used to writing really long sentences, and you want to try to break it up just so it's a little easier to read. If you read newspaper articles or something like that, that will kind of give you an idea. You want to be concise and not wordy, so don't use 3 words if you can use 1. And you also want to make sure you will use strong verbs and avoid the passive voice. So you want the subject and verb very active and clear, right? Those kinds of sentences are just much easier for people to read and understand. The next thing is to make sure your examples are specific and vivid. So here's this slide with the senses. Try to make the beginning attract interest. So one way to do so is through sensual detail, like sound, smell, taste, feel, look. You don't want to overdo it, but detail is good. The next one is avoid cliche. Again, my favorites are usually like anything involving like climbing a hill or a mountain. The innocence of children is one. Bringing a smile to someone's face is another one. Right? These kinds of things that come up a lot. My other suggestion is to avoid quoting other people and talking too much about other doctors. Sometimes people want to write about their influences in their personal statement, which is a great idea, but you don't want it to turn into sort of a tribute to, Dr. X, because it really needs to be about you. And then the last step to revising is that it needs to be grammatical and error-free. This is a pet peeve for a lot of application readers. Doctors are a very meticulous lot of people, and when you have a lot of errors, it just makes you look sloppy, right? And you don't want a sloppy and careless doctor, so it just casts an immediate shadow over your application. Another suggestion I have is to read your statement out loud just to help you catch errors. And then other revision suggestions are to revise with an open mind and not to get too attached to one idea at the start of the process. So sometimes when people are revising, they don't want to think about revising as sort of a wholesale, like structural revision, but sometimes that's the best thing to do. So kind of keep an open mind and a humility about revising your essay. It's okay to adapt, right? It's okay to change the order. There's nothing wrong with that. And then this sort of relates to remembering the importance of humility, both in the statement itself and in writing it, right? You have to sort of be willing to change. and adapt to circumstances. All right, step 5. Get an outside opinion and revise more. So my suggestion, if you get outside advice, most people will, is not to wait until you feel almost done to get outside opinions from your advisor or writing consultant. So oftentimes people, students come to me and say, okay, I'm going to submit it tomorrow. I just want someone else to read it through. And that is, it's sort of a bad position to put yourself in, because if your writing consultant or reader just says, well, I think you really need to change your whole opening, you will feel so disheartened. And that's not what you want to happen, right? You want to kind of still have an open mind and leave yourself time. You also don't want to be in a time crunch. You want some time to digest and make edits. So major rewrites are sometimes necessary, but waiting too long can just, it feels like too much, or I think both mentally and just pure time-wise. My next suggestion is to be choosy in who you ask. So there's a few categories of this. One is asking too many people. So some people will send their personal statement to everyone they can think of. I actually think it's kind of a mistake, because the truth is every reader will have a different response. That is just the truth of human nature. If you ask 20 people to read your personal statement, you will get so many suggestions that you cannot incorporate them all, and you will feel really overwhelmed. So, whittle it down to people that you think are going to give you a really good, honest opinion. I also think you want to avoid asking people who you know really well, and people who might not want to be too critical, like, your significant other or like your parent. Sometimes those people are just, or sometimes those people too, like oftentimes someone who knows you well will have a fixed idea of what you need to write about, and they'll say like, you need to write about this one thing, but that might not be true, right? So just kind of be aware of that. And always return to the message you want your essay to communicate, right? So I suggest that you ask the reader if your essay conveys the message. What makes a good medical student? What makes a good colleague? What are your best personal qualities? What are the moments where you've shown these qualities through your actions? And in what way do you think you are most different from your fellow applicants? So one thing you can kind of do if you have other readers is ask them those questions after they read it and see if their answers match what you have in your head. And then if the answers don't match or they can't answer it, then you might, right, then you know you need to revise. Always get outside feedback on humor. I kind of recommend against humor. I mean, you should be humble, but things like being self-deprecating or being really sarcastic, it just does not translate well onto paper. And again, be willing to revise again and again. All right, so now we've reached the end of the 5 steps, so I'll just kind of recap them. You want the personal statement to feel authentic and be the best version of yourself. So see it as the opportunity to show who you are. So we'll review the 5 steps. It's evaluate, brainstorm, write, revise, and get advice. Right? Most important, just be honest. Only you can decide how you want to present yourself. It's your personal statement at the end of the day. It's you going to medical school. It's not your friend. It's not your parent, right? It's not your roommate. You are the one going to medical school. You are the one who has to stand behind this personal statement. You want an essay that you feel happy with. So if you follow these steps, I hope that you will have a less painful writing experience.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jessica, for the wonderful and informative webinar. Thank you to the attendees for your questions, your answers, and carving out the time to attend this evening. Now, your goal in your personal statement, as Jessica said earlier, is to introduce yourself to the admissions committee in a distinctive way as a real human being, an individual, and to help them go beyond the transcript and score report, to really get to know you, a real person motivated for different reasons to become a physician with hopes and dreams, skills and strengths, and lots of competition for every single spot. Your goal in applying to medical school is to apply confidently and successfully to the best programs for you. Jessica has given you tons of great advice this evening in terms of how to distinguish yourself through your personal statement. She's told you what you need to do But she can't, and no one can teach you how to apply these exit suggestions to your particular situation unless they work with you one-on-one. To get that kind of support, you need the know-how supplied by experts applying general information to you as an individual, and that is consulting. Jessica, the other medical school admissions consultants at Accepted, and I have mentored hundreds, if not thousands, of medical school applicants through the writing required of the medical school application process. And that includes the personal statement, the most meaningful experiences, the activity descriptions, and of course, secondary essays. And then there's interviews and sometimes waitlist correspondence. Given the complexity of the application process and the stakes, you need a guide who knows the process inside and out and who can support you through this grueling journey. You need Accepted to be your guide. We provide a customized approach that fits your needs, not one size fits all. We have options so that if you only need a little help with one element of the application, that's what you can get. If you are starting from scratch and want comprehensive assistance, either just with the personal statement or with the primary application or with the primary and secondaries, that's what you get. You get one dedicated advisor who becomes expert in your story and helping you present it. You get candor and objectivity combined with decades of experience in medical school admissions. We have the admissions experts who can mentor you through the process so that you achieve your goal of applying confidently and successfully. Former admissions directors, staff members, post-bac directors, and published authors, they can be your guide through this stressful, time-consuming process. Now, we're going to have questions. I have a Q&A in a minute. And after the Q&A, I would suggest that you do the following. You visit accepted.com/medessay. Choose the service that's right for you. We have hourly fee options. We have an initial essay package. Get the guidance that you need and then apply confidently and effectively. Get the guidance you need for that missing how that I mentioned a moment ago. Go from confusion to clarity, from doubts to confidence. Now, some of you say, isn't Accepted expensive? Well, so is rejection. Our fees are clear, but the cost of rejection is not quite as obvious, even though it can be significantly higher. So let's take a look at the risks of not applying with Accepted. You have the cost of reapplication, and that can actually be, a couple $1,000s. A year of earnings, especially if you count in interview travel. A year of earnings at a much lower level than after you earn your MD or DO degree. The potential that you could have gotten into a better program with greater lifetime opportunities and even earnings. Every year, we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier and decided after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected to work with us the second time around. They would have been better off working with us initially, and so would you. But enough from me. What do Accepted clients say? Well, the first testimonial that you see here is from one of Jessica's clients. Jessica really helped me with writing my personal statement. She helped me throughout the entire editing process, not only for my personal statement for MD schools, but also for DO schools. Without her help, I don't think I would have been as successful as I was during my medical school application cycle. Now I will be starting medical school in the fall. Jessica is available if you wanted to work with her. If she will book up, I'm absolutely positive, but we also have other consultants, and another, Alicia's client wrote the second one. I'm not going to read the whole thing. However, when it came time to apply, Alicia never seemed to let that, meaning his being an international student, become a part of my application. She helped me iron out the kinks in my writing and encouraged me to present myself in the best way possible. Thanks to her, I interviewed at Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Northwestern, Duke, Dartmouth, and New York Medical Center. I'm proud to say that thanks to her coaching, I'll be matriculating at an Ivy League medical school this year. Thank you, Alicia, and everyone at Accepted for believing in me. So that's some feedback from a couple of clients. We have many more. You can look online and see that. In the meantime, right now, let's take some questions before we close. Okay, so you can post your questions in the question window. I have one here from Heather. How do you feel about adding other quotes, like from philosophers? And actually, Shanice also asked about adding a quote.
Yeah, no, these are good questions. So I am generally kind of against it. Now, I'm not generally, I I am one of those people who's like steadfastly opposed to quoting philosophers or anyone else. So I'll put it out there on the table. And there's a reason why. And the reason why is that it might be a quote that feels really profound to you, and then there might be like 100 other applicants quoting the exact same thing. Like I remember when everyone was quoting that, like something about the mountain, there's like people were quoting this doctor who had like gone abroad, and I will tell you, like everyone was quoting this doctor. So I worry that like there kind of is not an original quote. That said, like there are exceptions to everything. So I mean, I am sure someone got into Harvard Medical School and quoted a philosopher. I'm not arguing that all those people don't get into medical school, but I'm generally pretty opposed to it unless there is nothing else that you could write in that space.
I think the basic reason to stay away from quotes, I may not be quite as categorical as Jessica, but fundamentally I agree with her, is the schools want to hear from you. They don't want to hear from, Rousseau or John Locke or whatever philosopher you choose to quote, Marx.
Like the Dalai Lama I've seen.
Yeah.
I guess I just haven't seen it work very well.
Right.
I've seen it work okay in a law school application, but not in a med school one. So see, like I said, but I am not saying that people don't get in with quotes in their essays. I just am one of those people who, when I see it, I inwardly kind of groan a little bit. Yeah, and I think other icon people do too.
Right. And the other thing I would add, and here I would be very categorical, if you are going to use a quote, you're done. I mean, no more than one.
Oh, well, yeah.
Okay, that's your max on the quotes if you do want to use one. Okay.
And I worry about ones too that are like, and sometimes people use quotes from their dad or their mom or their grandparent that's like, my mom always told me to do my best. But the thing is, like, it might be really meaningful to you, but like, I will tell you my mom told me that too. So it's kind of like, I worry there isn't one that is, now, like I said, I could think of an exception if it was like something very specifically unique to you or your family and your situation, but.
And also I think if the rest of your application basically tied so beautifully with that quote.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. Then I could kind of see it. But I still would say no more than once. And one quote, one time, the rest is you. And it can't be too long. All right, let's go to some other questions because we're getting some good ones here. All right, Victoria writes, I'm a career changer and don't want to be negative about my previous job working in the community arts, but the truth is that it doesn't feel enough in terms of my truly being able to help people. Does it come across as talking negatively of that profession if I say it wasn't the satisfaction I was looking for?
Okay, so this is actually a really good question.
It is.
It is a good question because, truthfully, most people change careers because they aren't satisfied, right? So that's a fundamentally fair feeling to have. What I would suggest that you do, and I think this does take a little extra thinking and brainstorming, is to think about why medicine, right? So you might not have been fulfilled. So rather than thinking, why weren't you fulfilled in your other job, and it kind of doesn't matter what that job is, to think about what made you want to go to medicine. So I always say it's not about like swimming away from your old job, but swimming to medicine. Because you could say, I wasn't fulfilled in my old job, so I decided to become a CEO. That's a totally different, right? Totally different kind of fulfillment, like wanted more. So my question then is like, wanted more what? Like, what did you want more of? Why medicine? So, and I think that that's hard. And so I suggest that you sort of spend a little time thinking about like what it is that about medicine that particularly appealed to you. And that I think what helps a lot in answering that question.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. Yeah, and Victoria,
it takes a little time. It's a good question. It's hard. Yeah. It's not an easy thing to nail down. But if you can, then people are very persuaded that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, Victoria just wrote awesome, thanks. So apparently she was satisfied with the response. You're very welcome. Okay. This is another very interesting question from Morgan. I have spoken with an advisor for my undergrad, and she didn't feel that I should relay being a mother. But for me, being a mother is a huge part of my life. How do you feel about adding life stories such as that to the personal statement?
Okay, so that's a really good one too.
Yeah.
So yeah, so putting it up front, you don't have to. So this is like you do and don't have to too. You don't have to tell anyone that you have children, or that's not something you have to reveal. On the other, so not writing about it, you're not crossing like an ethical problem. But on the other hand, if it's really important to you and kind of why you want to do medicine or relates in some way to your sort of story, I think it's perfectly fine to talk about. The only reason why I think your undergraduate advisor told you that, I suspect, is that there might be a concern that you don't have time to go to medical school. Or like there's going to be a slight concern about time management, because that could really be the only potential downside, I think, is like, would an AdCom read your application and be like, oh, she doesn't have time to go to medical school, or she's not focused enough. I think that's pretty easily dispensed with, in some way. Again, so long as you make it positive. So an example of someone who wrote an essay, right, was to talk about being a single parent and maybe how hard it was at the beginning, and then why it was really inspiring, but then to sort of spend a little time talking about some accomplishments she made while a parent, just to kind of like hit home that, this person was mature and ready to go to school. I suspect that that's why your advisor said that. So it came from a good place. But I don't think you should not mention it if it's important to you.
Right. And I also think, I don't
I
know
mean,
what
I think
percentage.
being a parent is I think as a
It's an
parent,
incredibly maturing experience.
yeah, I think
Absolutely. There's no responsibility like it. You're responsible for a completely helpless human being when you
yeah, I
become a
mean, I
mother.
think it's a lot of personal growth. It's a lot of maturity.
We both have
Um,
children.
yeah, so I was gonna say I think it's an amazing, thing that really makes people grow up. So to me, it doesn't have that much of a downside. But again, I guess the anxiety is that like you're not ready. But I think that's so unfair though, because
I
I
think
don't
there's
know.
another issue, Jessica, a little bit more positively reflecting on the advisor's feedback.
Hmm.
Um, and that is that if you're focusing on motherhood, which let's face it, a large percentage of the population will share with Morgan,
Right.
then you're not talking about something that's distinctively hers necessarily, or that's driving her decision to become a doctor necessarily. So
Right.
if you focus on that a lot, just make sure that you also, as Jessica just said, reveal some impressive achievements and distinctive achievements, and also an individual perspective and point of view in regards to your qualifications for medicine, where you're going into medicine. Don't ignore that part of the application if you're going to talk about being a mother as well. Okay?
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think it works well if you have that balance.
Yeah. Okay. And then she added, well, motherhood has always been my driving factor, even before I actually had kids, so thanks for the advice. I'll look at how to add it. And I'll make sure I'll stick with other qualities in as well. Okay. Okay. Let's see. We got some other questions. Shanice asked, and I was almost sure somebody would ask this question. Earlier you said that writing our personal statement for ACOMAS has to be different from the MCAS. What did you mean by that?
Oh, very good question.
Yep.
Glad you asked. So ACOMAS requires a few small tweaks. So one is to consider the mission of DO schools, right? So DO schools put a little more emphasis on community service, more emphasis on soft skills, right? Like empathy and listening. So you want to make sure you really highlight that. The other thing you have to do for the ACOMAS essay is you have to talk in some way about shadowing or doing something where you observed a DO physician. As far as I know, you still need to put that in. It's really important to those schools that you're applying to their school not as like a backup. I mean, you think of it from their point of view. They don't want to be your backup. They want to be your first choice, and you need to show that you know what kind of program you're applying to and why. So I do think it requires some revision. Most people do, if you're applying to both, most people do their AMCAS one first, quite frankly. And I suggest they do because it's longer. Most people do the AMCAS one first and then revise it for ACOMAS.
Right, right. Okay, got some other excellent questions here from Demetrius. Just move. What is the correct way to detail overcoming academic hardship without focusing on the challenge?
That's really hard. So this is a tough one to answer in the abstract because it kind of depends a little bit on what your academic challenge was.
Yeah.
It depends. So if you have a pretty clear reason why that you had an academic challenge, say a family member passed away or something like that, that's something you can kind of address head on. And I think can quickly sort of say, this is what happened and here's what I did to overcome that and here's what I learned. Sometimes people have academic challenges, quite frankly, because they're freshmen in college and just like can't handle they're not ready to handle the workload. I don't know a nicer way to put that. And there are great people who fall into that category, not faulting them, right? In that case, I would say to try to point to like an upward trend to show like what you did to improve your grades after that. So it's kind of a hard one to answer because it sort of depends on what your transcript looks like. In all cases, I would say you want to emphasize either what you learned from the experience or what you did to sort of improve your work. Then, like I said, it tends to be really individualistic.
Right. I also did a podcast, accepted.com/137 called 5 A's for Low GPA. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're talking about, but we did discuss that there. There also, the point really of, and Jessica said this earlier, the point of dealing really with any kind of hardship is focusing not so much on the obstacle the problem and the issue, the negative, but the positive, what you did to overcome it and how well you're handling similar situations either later or now. But I would recommend that you, if the low GPA is really what we're talking about here, accept.com/137, I went into a lot more detail on what you can do with that. All right, we're going to take one more question. And this is another really good one. Lots of good. You're very welcome, Demetrius. From Joan, how far back in your lifetime is it all right to include in your personal statement? Does it have to be from your childhood experience or recent?
So I have, and here's again, I'll sort of make another general boldish statement. I don't really like childhood experiences unless for some reason there's something pretty extraordinary that happened. Remember that your personal statement isn't an autobiography, right? And by that I mean the personal statement doesn't need to go back to like I was born and then I was raised. I loved playing with my doctor kit, and then I took care of the dog. And right, you don't need to kind of go through all this thing. And of course, we're laughing because, and people have written that, right? So like actual things I have read. Now, sometimes there's someone who, for example, had childhood cancer, and that had a really profound effect on their life, or something like that. That's like, or they immigrated as a child. Sometimes people have these like really profound childhood experiences that I say, okay, yeah, that's something probably worth including, so long as you can explain to me why it relates to who you are now. But you don't need to go into your childhood. I actually prefer that people stay fairly recent, because we can assume that you've grown a lot, since you were 5 or whatever. I mean, and some people go back to like their birth. I've had people write their birth story. So, which, I'm like, you weren't
Cognizant.
I'm like, you weren't conscious. Like, how could that affect you? So I'm a person who says I prefer that you avoid it, again, unless you have something pretty extraordinary that you can. The other important thing is anything you talk about needs to really go back to the question of how does this relate to what kind of doctor you'll be? How does this relate to why you want to go to medical school, right? If you can't tie it, if you can't make a good connection, if you can't connect dots between any experience and what you are now or why you're ready for med school, then you really want to question why that's in your personal statement.
I think it's a great point. I'm just going to add one thing to it. If you're talking about something that happened when you're 5, you either don't have a lot to say about recent activities that influence or show your fitness for medicine, or you're leaving something better out. Either way, it's not great. So I completely endorse what Jessica just said. I completely agree with it. But keep in mind, you have character limits, whether it's the ACOMAS or the MCAS, and you should be putting the best stuff in there. If you
Yeah.
go, and if your best stuff is something that happened when you're 5 years old, and you're now 22 or 28 or 30, whatever, what have you been doing lately?
I mean, I could see a case where someone like came, let's say you immigrated when you were a child, and that had a profound effect. So like you've always worked with immigrant communities, but I would talk about it by saying, I've always worked with immigrant communities,
Right, and it would
right?
be
And
something
then
almost
if
a
you,
statement in passing.
yeah, and then you could really quickly say, that's because like my family is one, and then you're done. You
Right,
don't want to like
right,
yeah, I agree. Like if it relates to like an intense focus on what you're doing now.
right. Okay. I want to thank you again for your time, your questions, your answers, your attention. We'd love to help you as we've helped the clients on the screen and thousands of others over the last 20 years. So once again, here's what I recommend you do as a follow-up to today's webinar. Visit exhibit.com/medessay. Choose the service that's right for you, get the guidance you need, and apply confidently and effectively. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Jessica, thank you again.
Great. Thanks guys for coming.